They told you the story was just a rumor, an old folk tale whispered in the freezing winds of Europe's forgotten winters. But rumors don't leave behind records. And yet, in the brittle parchment of a parish ledger dated 1897, there lies a line, scrawled in a trembling hand. The children did not return. 64 names, each belonging to a boy of the choir school, gone in a single winter's night. No footprints in the snow, no evidence of a struggle. Just an empty dormitory, its iron beds still warm, hymnals open as if they had been interrupted mid-song. You weren't supposed to know this. The town buried the record, priests burned sermons, and officials who investigated were silenced or relocated. But the truth persists like rot beneath the painted wood of an old cathedral. Behind every smiling facade of innocence, there are corridors of silence. And behind silence, power. The kind of power that feeds not on faith, but on fear. Imagine it. A single winter storm, lanterns flickering across icy stone streets, bells tolling for midnight mass. The choir was meant to sing, voices rising toward heaven. Instead, they vanished into the dark, leaving only echoes. And for over a century, the Vatican has kept its distance, allowing the story to wither into local legend. But why would an institution of God, obsessed with miracles and martyrdom, shy away from this tale? Because not all mysteries elevate faith. Some unravel it. Every man in power knows this. Control isn't sustained by truth, but by what is hidden. The choir school was more than a place for song. It was a place of shaping, of molding young minds to obey in rhythm and chant. A perfect laboratory for testing the limits of discipline, silence, and spiritual control. But something went wrong that winter. Something the authorities could never allow the world to see. You see, history isn't a collection of dates. It's a graveyard of disappearances, silences, and contradictions. 64 boys erased in a single season is not a tragedy. It's a message. One written in absence, carried through centuries, waiting for someone like you to notice. And now you know the secret you were never meant to hear. Sometimes, the most chilling stories aren't invented. They're erased. When you hear of disappearances, your mind seeks the simplest explanation. Kidnapping, starvation, a wandering wolf pack in the cold night. But 64 boys, every one accounted for, disciplined, trained, and housed within stone walls no intruder could breach. No signs of blood, no doors broken, no witnesses. That's not chance. That's orchestration. The deeper you dig into this story, the more it feels less like a tragedy and more like a ritual. Because rituals require silence, secrecy, and sacrifice. And when an entire institution turns away from answers, it usually means the institution was complicit. The Holloway Parish records, one of the few fragments that escaped the fire, mention a peculiar phrase beside the final roll call: Cantus Mortem, the song of death. Why would a parish clerk, a man of God, write such a phrase in Latin, next to the names of children who never came home? You begin to realize that the choir school was never just about hymns for Mass. It was an experiment in resonance, in frequency, in the belief that the human voice, when trained and harmonized, could open doors no prayer ever could. Sound has always been a weapon. From ancient Sumerian chants to Gregorian incantations, rulers have known that vibrations influence the human mind. Choirs were not just for beauty, they were for control. Think. 64 young voices raised in unity, stripped of ego, of individuality, a perfect hive. a collective resonance strong enough to pierce more than the night air. Perhaps they opened something. Perhaps something answered. And if such a doorway was opened, who benefited from it? Certainly not the children. Power never sacrifices its architects, only its vessels. The choir school, hidden deep in the frozen heart of Europe, became the stage for an event no man was meant to witness. The boys disappeared because they had served their purpose. But ask yourself this: where did they go? Taken by men in robes and silence, swallowed by the institution that raised them, or pulled into something far older, far darker than the church itself? The answer doesn't comfort. It corrupts. And that's why no sermon, no homily, no lecture from the pulpit will ever mention the winter the choir went silent. Because silence is the truest confession of power. They say memory is fragile. That time erodes truth until all that remains is myth. But some memories are erased not by time, but by force. The choir school's records didn't vanish in accident or neglect. They were burned methodically in a fire that consumed the archives but spared the bishop's quarters. A miracle, they called it. No, miracles don't leave ash piled neatly around missing names. Yet in secret libraries across Europe, fragments survive. Letters from visiting priests who described the boys as pale, sleepless, and strangely synchronized. Witnesses noted how the children no longer sang like individuals, but as one voice, one unbroken, chilling tone that vibrated through the bones. That wasn't music, that was weaponization. Imagine being a villager outside the stone walls, hearing not hymns, but something closer to a machine humming, alive, unnatural. Do you see it now? The institution wasn't teaching them to sing, it was programming them. The boys were tools, fine-tuned to a frequency meant to crack open the vault of human perception, to make them instruments of access. Access to what? That's the question you were never supposed to ask, because in the very same winter those boys vanished. The church's ledgers recorded sudden wealth, donations arriving from faceless benefactors, gold flowing from noble families who were known, documented, to practice rites older than Christianity itself. Families whose bloodlines still run through the veins of modern power. So ask yourself, was the choir a school, or was it a farm? A breeding ground for voices the powerful could harvest. 64 children disappearing in one night isn't tragedy, it's transaction. Paid for, signed, and sealed in silence. But here is the most disturbing clue. Decades later, villagers swore they could still hear faint singing on certain winter nights. Not joyful, not mournful, just sustained, like an echo that refused to die. If that's true, then those children never left. They were absorbed, trapped, in whatever resonance they had opened. Neither alive nor dead, a choir without end dot. And if sound has that power, imagine how often it's used against you now. Not with choirs, but with media. Not in cathedrals, but in your devices. The conditioning didn't end with the children. It only evolved. You were told history is written in ink, but that was a lie. History is written in omission, in the things you were told not to see. The choir school became nothing more than a footnote, a burned building, a forgotten scandal. Yet the pattern repeats. The Holloway archives, the orphan trains, the vanished workhouses. Each case shares the same signatures. Missing children, erased documents, sudden wealth, and silence enforced by authority. Think carefully. How many times have you heard of disasters where the death toll never quite added up? Fires that consumed whole wards of children but left no bodies. Accidents where names dissolved into nothing. It is the same story told in different costumes. Institutions feed on innocence. The faces change, but the machinery stays. The church was not a house of God. It was a house of power. And power does not worship. Power harvests. Those 64 children were not just victims. They were ingredients. Their voices were refined into something the elite could consume, a sound tuned to bend perception. You've felt it before, haven't you? That invisible pull when a song chills your spine or a chant clouds your judgment. Multiply that by 64 and you have a weapon. The villagers swore they heard the sound even after the children were gone. A vibration that clung to stone. That is not superstition. That is resonance, an imprint on reality itself. Science today admits it. Sound can shatter glass, alter mood, even rewire the brain. Do you believe the ancients didn't know? They knew. They guarded it. And when the church inherited their ruins, it inherited the recipe. But the question is, why erase it? Why erase the children, the music, the evidence? Because the power was not meant for the masses. It was meant for bloodlines. It was meant for the few who already stood on thrones. The choir was a key, and the door it unlocked, that is, the part they never recorded. Yet ask yourself, what door requires the sacrifice of 64 children? What entity demands not faith, but frequency? You weren't supposed to hear this, but now that you have, you cannot go back. You've already tuned in, and whether you realize it or not, something may already be listening back. You see, the Holloway Choir School was never meant to survive history. It was meant to vanish. That was always the plan. But traces remain, buried in the cracks of old parish records and whispered through diaries of servants who heard too much. One wrote of shadows moving in the chapel when no candles were lit. Another described voices echoing in the corridors, yet the voices sang when the children were already gone. And then there was the ledger, a single book, half burned, discovered decades later in the rubble of the estate. On its brittle pages were not hymns, but numbers. Carefully recorded amounts, paid by nameless benefactors. Each payment coincided with a child's disappearance. 64 transactions, 64 vanished souls. Wealth transferred in exchange for silence. And behind it all, initials that match powerful families. Families whose descendants still sit on boards, still shape laws, still own the banks you trust. Do you see the pattern now? Institutions don't just control the present. They sculpt memory itself. They erase. They distort. They silence. What you call history is a curated illusion. You are given the bones of a story, while the marrow, the living essence, is siphoned away and consumed by those who know how to use it. Think of the implications. If entire generations can vanish, if whole groups of children can be wiped from record and absorbed into ritual, what does that say about the world you live in now? Do you truly believe it has stopped? Or is it happening in ways so carefully hidden that you mistake it for coincidence, for tragedy, for fate? The Holloway Choir is more than an old ghost story. It is a template, a manual for extraction, a warning that whenever innocence gathers in one place, power is drawn like a predator. And every time, the truth is buried under layers of piety, patriotism, or progress. Different masks, same hunger. You feel it, don't you? That tightening in your chest, that realization that the walls around your mind are thinner than you thought. That's not fear. That's recognition. Somewhere deep down, you already knew. You just didn't want to admit it until now. They called it providence. They called it tragedy. But behind closed doors, they called it sacrifice. The Holloway family believed, like many elites of their time, that energy could be harvested, not just from the living, but from the young, the innocent, the untouched. In their doctrine, purity was currency, and the sound of a child's voice, unbroken by age, was the most potent offering of all. That's why it was a choir school. That's why it had to be music. The children were not taught to sing for God, but for something far older. something that feasted on harmony, the way carrion beasts feast on flesh. The higher the note, the deeper the offering, and when the voices vanished, when their echoes died in the rafters, the manor grew quieter, and the hallways grew wealthier. Their power spread like a contagion through courts, banks, and governments. This is how the world works. You see a cathedral, a parliament, a monument of progress. They see an altar, a place to channel devotion into submission, innocence into obedience, life into death. The system does not simply ask for your belief. It drains it, feeds on it, and returns only shadows in exchange. Now I need you to do something, not for me, for yourself. Because if you've listened this far, you've already crossed a threshold. There's no turning back. To anchor yourself in this awareness, type this phrase in the comments, twice, exactly as you hear it. No choir sings forever. Write it once for the children who vanished, and once for yourself. Because by doing so, you mark the moment you stopped being a passive spectator and became a seeker of forbidden truth. It will feel symbolic, almost ritualistic, because it is. This is how you lock the knowledge inside you. The world does not want you to remember. The system counts on you forgetting, moving on, numbing yourself with triviality. But by writing it, you refuse. You claim your identity. You draw a line. And when you do, you'll notice something. The more you awaken, the more resistance you'll face. Glitches in your feed, shadows of doubt, distractions designed to pull you back to sleep. That's how you'll know you're close to something real. What happened in the Holloway Manor wasn't just ritual. It was programming. You've been told that control comes from force, from armies, from laws. But the Holloways and the institutions they fed knew the truth. The most obedient slave is the one who doesn't realize he is enslaved. And that begins with the mind. Think about it. Why a choir? Why children? Because the sound of collective harmony creates more than music. It creates unity, a singular voice. To shatter that unity, to twist it into fear, is to plant an invisible seed in the psyche. That togetherness is dangerous, that innocence leads to disappearance. Do you see the brilliance? They weren't just erasing children. They were erasing the idea of innocence itself. Every system you live under operates on the same principle. Schools, workplaces, governments, even your entertainment. They herd you, harmonize you, and then, when you've given enough of your energy, they consume it. Not in blood, not in ritual, but in compliance, in silence, in distraction. They've refined the Holloway doctrine into something so efficient you don't even notice it. And this is the real corruption. They don't need your chains. They only need your attention. Every hour you spend worshiping at their shrines of consumption, every thought bent toward their narratives, is a sacrifice. And like the children's voices in that choir, your focus is harvested, broken down, and fed upward into a structure you'll never see. The Holloways were not unique. They were pioneers. Today, the manor has no walls, no locked doors, no candlelit chambers. The manor is everywhere. It's the glowing screen in your hand, the sermon of the news anchor, the algorithm that knows what you'll crave before you do. The rituals have gone digital, the altars invisible, and the worst part? You think you're free. You think you chose this, but you were guided here, shaped here, nudged one step at a time until the only path left was the one they carved for you. The choir still sings. It just sings in silence, through compliance, through the echo of minds that believe they are their own. The Holloway family may have been buried, their manor left to rot, but their blueprint survived. The doctrine of silence, the science of fear, the art of erasing without leaving fingerprints. Today, you won't hear about children vanishing from choirs. That would spark outrage. Today, the disappearances are quieter, more surgical. The vanishing isn't of bodies, it's of identities, of voices, of resistance. Think about how many times you've seen someone stand up, someone who dared to speak against the system, and then watched them vanish. Not physically, but socially, digitally, economically. Their accounts deleted, their reputations shredded, their careers dissolved overnight. One day they exist, the next, it's as though they never did. Doesn't it feel familiar? The choir reduced to silence. The Holloway ritual reborn in algorithms and institutions that appear benevolent, even protective. This is not new. The machinery of control has always relied on two tools: fear and erasure. Fear keeps you compliant. Erasure keeps the examples hidden. That's why you can feel something is wrong, but cannot point directly to it. It is by design. The same way the townspeople in 1832 knew children were missing, but could not speak without risking their own families. You too are trapped in a cycle of silent obedience. The Holloways weren't simply aristocrats playing with darkness. They were architects of a truth modern institutions perfected: that to control the present, you must erase the past. That is why so much of history feels fragmented, contradictory, forbidden. It's not because the past is unclear. It's because clarity is dangerous. Truth makes people ungovernable. Look carefully at the world around you. Ancient corruption is still here, just translated into new languages. Financial codes, digital censorship, political doublespeak. You are surrounded by Holloway manners, invisible walls erected not from stone, but from laws, debts, and screens. And while the rituals no longer smell of candle wax and iron chains, the result is the same: silence, obedience, disappearance. You were taught history is a straight line. It isn't. It's a spiral. What began in those shadowed halls has never ended. It only evolved. The question is not whether the Holloways are gone. The question is, how much of their ritual is alive inside the very systems you obey without question? Most men believe freedom is a choice, that if they wanted to, they could simply unplug, walk away, and see the truth for what it is. But that's the most dangerous illusion of all. The systems built around you, just like the Holloway rituals, are not cages made of iron. They are cages made of perception, and perception is far stronger than steel. You don't see the walls because they aren't there physically. You feel them as invisible limits. What you dare to question, what you dare to say, how far you dare to push. This is why men go through their entire lives thinking they are free while unconsciously living inside a maze constructed generations ago. The Holloway family mastered this. Their children never screamed in public because their rituals weren't simply physical, they were psychological. The children were taught silence was safety, obedience was survival. By the time the villagers noticed something was wrong, it was already too late. The children had been conditioned into complicity. Do you see it now? You were taught the same lesson, that silence protects you, that speaking out will cost you everything, and this is why very few escape. It isn't because the truth is hidden, it's because the truth demands sacrifice. Once you begin to see how false the world is, how much of your identity was built on lies, you can never unsee it, and the system counts on that fear. They know most men would rather remain blind than burn their false lives to ashes. But here's the paradox. The moment you see the cage, you are no longer fully inside it. Awareness itself cracks the bars. The question is whether you will take the next step or retreat back into comfort. Because history shows us this. The Holloways never needed chains. They needed belief, and belief is what still imprisons you now. So I ask you, if you are still listening, if your pulse hasn't slowed, if your mind hasn't shut, put this down yet. Comment below these exact words twice. I refuse the Holloway silence. Write it, not for me, but for yourself. Mark your defiance publicly. Show the algorithm, show the shadows, show yourself that you are not one of the silenced, because from this point on, you cannot go back. The walls have been revealed, and the cost of seeing is everything. You've walked the corridors of the Holloway Manor with me, but now you need to understand something far darker. The Holloway family was never destroyed. Their house may have crumbled, their name may have faded from polite records, but their methods survived. They were carried forward, buried inside institutions that shape your life today. Do you think the rituals of silence, obedience, and fear stopped in that manner? No. They were refined, perfected, and repackaged under banners like education, governance, religion, media. What the Holloways practiced in secret became the blueprint for systems that now operate in the open, hidden in plain sight. Look at the schoolroom. Children lined up, repeating phrases they don't understand, conditioned to obey authority rather than seek truth. Look at the cathedral. Faith turned from inner fire into a spectacle of guilt and control. Look at the courthouse. Justice twisted into theater, where the wealthy always walk free. These are not accidents. These are designs. The Holloways taught one lesson above all. You don't need to chain a man if you can chain his perception. And that's exactly where you stand now. Your world is not a free world. It is a carefully crafted stage. The roles are assigned, the scripts are written, and the only thing forbidden is improvisation. But here's the truth they never wanted you to know. Awareness burns through the stage. Once you see it, the script loses power. The moment you realize that the Holloway curse isn't some ghost story, but a living system still shaping your thoughts, your choices, your silence, you gain the one weapon they cannot control: choice. Not the shallow choice of brands or ballots, but the deep choice. The decision to break silence, to think beyond their fences, to reclaim what was stolen. That is dangerous. That is forbidden. That is why you were never meant to hear this, and now you can never unhear it. The Holloway shadows walk beside you because they were always here, dressed in suits, titles, uniforms, and robes. The manor never fell. It simply expanded until it became the very society you live in. So ask yourself, now that you've walked the full descent, will you continue playing the Holloway's game? Or will you be the man who tears down the stage, even if it costs him everything? The silence is waiting, but so is the fire.